Sometimes a love story isn't just a love story. Sometimes it's a revolution. It's a quiet personal decision between two people that somehow manages to shake the foundations of empires and challenge the prejudices of an entire generation. This is one of those stories. It's not about grand battles or political treaties signed in stuffy rooms. It's about a simple, profound connection that blossomed in the dreary, rain-slicked streets of post-war London, a connection that would ultimately help give birth to a new nation. Imagine for a moment, it's the late 1940s. The world is just beginning to stitch itself back together after the horrors of the Second World War. In London, the fog is thick, the food is rationed, and life is a study in shades of gray. This is the world of Ruth Williams, a young English woman working as a clerk at Lloyd's of London. She was, by all accounts, an ordinary woman. She came from a respectable middle-class family, served in the Women's Auxiliary Air Force during the war, and lived a life that was, on the surface, entirely unremarkable. But Ruth possessed a spirit that was anything but ordinary. She was sharp, inquisitive, and had a quiet strength that would soon be tested in ways she could never have imagined. Across the city, a young man named Seretse Khama was studying law. He wasn't just any student. He was the heir to the throne of the Bangwato people, the largest and most powerful tribe in the British protectorate of Bechuanaland, a vast arid land in southern Africa that would one day become the nation of Botswana. Seretse was charismatic, intelligent, and deeply committed to his future role as king. He carried the weight of his people's expectations on his shoulders. Sent to England to acquire the knowledge and skills he would need to lead them into a modern era. One foggy evening in June 1947, their two very different worlds collided. A mutual friend invited them to a dance hosted by the London Missionary Society. There, amidst the gentle sway of the music and the polite chatter, Ruth Williams met Seretse Khama. There was an instant spark, a connection that transcended the chasm of their different backgrounds. He was captivated by her quick wit and independent mind. She was drawn to his warmth, his intelligence, and the passion with which he spoke of his home and his people. Their courtship was a whirlwind of shared dreams and stolen moments in a city that was slowly rediscovering color. They went to jazz clubs, took long walks, and talked for hours about everything and nothing. They fell deeply, irrevocably in love. For Ruth and Seretse, it was simple. They had found their other half. They decided to get married. But for the world around them, it was anything but simple. Their decision would ignite a firestorm of controversy that would reach the highest levels of the British government and send shock waves across two continents. This is the story of Ruth Williams Khama, the woman England and Africa both tried to reject, and how her unwavering love for one man helped to forge a nation. To truly understand the seismic impact of Ruth and Seretse's love story, we need to transport ourselves back to that specific moment in history. The year 1947 was a pivot point. The British Empire, though victorious in the war, was beginning to crumble. India had just gained its independence, and the winds of change were starting to blow through Africa. However, the old imperial mindset was far from dead. The corridors of power in London were still filled with men who believed in the inherent superiority of the white race and the necessity of maintaining a rigid colonial hierarchy. In southern Africa, this racial hierarchy was being codified into a brutal system of oppression. In neighboring South Africa, the National Party was on the verge of coming to power, ready to implement its terrifying policy of apartheid, a complete legal separation of the races. To them, the idea of a black man and a white woman marrying was not just scandalous, it was a threat to the very fabric of their society. Bechuanaland, Seretse's home, was technically a British protectorate, not a colony. This meant it had a degree of self-governance, but it was economically dependent on and geographically sandwiched between South Africa and southern Rhodesia, both of which were staunchly committed to white minority rule. The British were walking a diplomatic tightrope. They were terrified of upsetting South Africa, which was a valuable source of gold and uranium, crucial for Britain's post-war economy and its burgeoning nuclear program. This was the explosive geopolitical landscape into which Ruth and Seretse, blissfully unaware, were about to step. Their love was a purely personal affair, but in the paranoid, racially charged atmosphere of the time, it was seen as a political act of defiance. When they announced their intention to marry, the reaction was immediate and ferocious. Both families were horrified. Ruth's father, a former army captain, forbade her from ever seeing Seretse again and threw her out of the family home. He couldn't comprehend how his daughter could betray her race and her country in such a way. The British government was in a state of panic. Officials from the colonial office summoned Seretse to a meeting and tried to intimidate him into abandoning the marriage. They told him it would destroy his chances of ever becoming king and would bring ruin upon his people. They painted a picture of chaos and bloodshed, all because of his selfish desires. But Seretse stood firm. His love for Ruth was not a whim. It was the foundation upon which he intended to build his life. He calmly informed the stunned officials that he would not be swayed. The church also buckled under the pressure. The Bishop of London refused to marry them. Priests who had initially agreed to perform the ceremony mysteriously became unavailable after receiving visits from government officials. It seemed that every institution, every pillar of British society, was conspiring to keep them apart. Undeterred, Ruth and Seretse found a sympathetic registrar, and in September 1948, they were finally married in a simple civil ceremony at a Kensington registry office. They had no family present, only a few loyal friends. It was a quiet, defiant act of love in a world that seemed determined to tear them apart. But their troubles were only just beginning. The storm they had unleashed was about to cross the ocean and break upon the sun-baked plains of Africa. The news of the marriage hit Bechuanaland like a thunderclap. Seretse's uncle, Seretse Khama, who had been regent during Seretse's youth, was a powerful and respected leader. He had been grooming Seretse to take over as Kagosi, or king, and had personally funded his education in England. Seretse was a traditionalist, and the thought of a white woman becoming the queen, the mother of the nation, was anathema to him. He was convinced that this marriage would be a disaster for the Bangwato people. He believed it would violate their traditions and, more pragmatically, give the British a perfect excuse to annex their land or undermine their sovereignty. Seretse immediately convened a series of gotlas, traditional tribal assemblies, where all the men of the tribe could voice their opinions. The first few were heavily stacked with his supporters, and they overwhelmingly rejected the marriage. Seretse, still in England with Ruth, was condemned in his absence. Seretse sent a stark message. "The nation does not accept your wife. We do not want her. We will not have her." The pressure on Seretse was immense. He was being asked to choose between his wife and his birthright, between the woman he loved and the people he was born to lead. It was a choice that would have broken a lesser man, but Seretse was not a lesser man. In 1949, he decided to return to Bechuanaland to face his people directly. He left Ruth behind in England, promising to send for her once he had won the tribe over. His arrival was met with a tense and divided atmosphere. Seretse had done his work well, and many were deeply suspicious of Seretse's white wife. The decisive Kgotla was held in the large, open-air assembly ground in Seretse, the capital of the Bangwato. Thousands of men gathered under the hot African sun, their faces a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Chikedi spoke first, passionately arguing that Seretse had betrayed their customs and that a white queen was unthinkable. His words were powerful, and the crowd seemed to sway with him. Then it was Seretse's turn. He did not speak like a politician or a king demanding obedience. He spoke like a man in love, a man who believed in a future where people were judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. In a speech that would become legendary, he addressed the crowd. "I am your king," he said, his voice ringing with conviction, "but I am also a man. I have chosen a wife for myself. You say you do not want a white queen, but have you met her? Do you know her? Do you know her heart? She is a woman who loves me, and I love her. She is a woman who is willing to leave her home, her family, and everything she knows to come and live among you, to be one of you. Is that not something to be respected?" He continued, his voice rising with emotion. "Stand up those who are for me." There was a moment of breathless silence. The fate of his kingship, his marriage, and perhaps the future of his country hung in the balance. Then one by one, then in dozens, then in hundreds, the men began to rise to their feet. A thunderous roar of approval echoed across the plain. They had chosen their king. They had chosen love over prejudice. An eyewitness later recalled the electrifying moment. It was a scene of the wildest enthusiasm. Seretse was carried shoulder high through the cheering crowds. Chikedi, defeated and humiliated, stormed out of the Kotla and went into self-imposed exile. Seretse had won, or so it seemed. The British government had been watching these events with growing alarm. They had expected Seretse to fail. They had counted on Chikedi to bring him to heel. Seretse's victory at the Kotla was a direct challenge to their authority. More importantly, it sent a terrifying message to their neighbors in South Africa and southern Rhodesia. The apartheid government in South Africa was absolutely livid. They saw a black chief with a white wife on their border as a direct existential threat. They put immense pressure on Britain, threatening to impose trade embargoes and cut off vital supplies. Faced with this pressure, the British government made a cynical and shameful decision. They decided that this inconvenient love story had to be stopped no matter the cost. They refused to recognize the Kgotla's decision. They announced they were launching a judicial inquiry into Seretse's fitness to rule. It was a sham, a thinly veiled excuse to get rid of him. They summoned Seretse and a heavily pregnant Ruth, who had now joined him, to a meeting. They tricked him into believing it was a final negotiation. Once there, they delivered their devastating verdict. Seretse was to be exiled from his homeland for a minimum of 5 years. Ruth was told she would be allowed to stay, but without her husband. The cruelty of the decision was breathtaking. They were tearing a family apart for political expediency. A secret government document, from the time now declassified, lays bare the cold, racist calculation. The view of the Union of South Africa government is that the marriage of a chief of a native tribe adjoining the Union to a white woman is, in principle, a disastrous one. We must not and we cannot appear to be acquiescing in it. Britain chose apartheid gold over love and justice. Ruth, pregnant and alone in a foreign land, was faced with an impossible choice. The British offered her a generous financial settlement if she would just leave Africa and never return. They wanted to erase her, to pretend this marriage had never happened. But they had underestimated Ruth Williams' Khama. She looked the British official in the eye and gave him a one-word answer: no. She would not be bought. She would not abandon her husband or his people. In that moment of quiet defiance, the clerk from London showed the world the heart of a queen. She gave birth to her first child, a daughter named Jacqueline, in Bechuanaland, surrounded by the Bangwato people who had come to embrace her as their own. But her husband was gone, a political prisoner thousands of miles away. The lonely years of exile had begun. The 5 years of exile were a crucible for Ruth and Seretse, a period of immense personal pain and profound political growth. They were separated by thousands of miles, their only connection a steady stream of letters that crossed the ocean. These letters, filled with longing, frustration, and unwavering devotion, are a testament to the incredible strength of their bond. Ruth, now living in London with her young daughter, found herself in an unfamiliar and often hostile environment. She was a political outcast, the woman at the center of a scandal that had embarrassed the government. She was hounded by the press, her every move scrutinized. Yet she carried herself with a quiet dignity that won her many admirers. She became an unlikely political activist. She gave interviews, met with members of parliament, and spoke at public rallies, always telling her story with a simple, powerful honesty. She wasn't a firebrand orator, but her sincerity and her obvious love for her husband resonated with the British public, many of whom were growing increasingly disgusted with their government's shabby treatment of the couple. She was no longer just the White Queen. She was a wife and mother fighting for her family. Meanwhile, in Bechuanaland, the Bangwato people refused to accept the British government's decision. They saw the exile of their chosen king as a profound injustice. As a form of protest, they refused to pay taxes and boycotted the administration of the British-appointed district commissioner. Their loyalty to Seretse was absolute. The British had hoped that with Seretse gone, the tribe would eventually accept Chikedi back as regent or choose a new leader. They were wrong. The Bangwato made it clear, no Seretse, no king. Their resistance was a powerful display of passive defiance, a quiet rebellion that slowly but surely began to shift the political calculus. Back in London, Seretse was living in forced exile, a king without a kingdom. He was frustrated and angry, but he used his time to finish his law studies and to lobby anyone who would listen to his cause. He and Ruth formed a formidable team, working in tandem to keep their story in the public eye. They found powerful allies in the British Parliament, particularly from the left wing of the Labour Party, and a few principled conservatives who were appalled by the government's actions. Figures like Tony Benn became tireless champions of their cause. One of the most poignant and little-known aspects of their exile was the immense personal toll it took on them. In one of his letters, Seretse wrote to Ruth, "I am so lonely for you. It is a sterile and empty life I lead here, but I live in the hope of our reunion." Ruth, for her part, had to raise their daughter and later their first son, Ian, who was born in England, largely on her own. She had to explain to her children why their father couldn't be with them, a heartbreaking task for any mother. The turning point came in 1956. The continued resistance of the Bangwato, combined with growing public pressure in Britain and a changing international climate, made the government's position untenable. They were looking for a way out of the mess they had created. They offered Seretse a deal. He would be allowed to return to Bechuanaland, but only if he renounced all claims to the throne for himself and his children. It was a bitter pill to swallow. He was being asked to give up his birthright, the legacy of his ancestors. After much agonizing discussion with Ruth, Seretse made a momentous decision. He accepted the deal. He realized that the title of Gosi, or chief, was becoming less important than the future of his country. He saw that the old system of tribal governance would have to adapt if Bechuanaland was to become a modern independent nation. He decided to return not as a king, but as a private citizen, ready to serve his people in a new way. In October 1956, Seretse, Ruth, and their 2 children returned home. Their arrival in Seretse was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. Thousands upon thousands of people flocked to welcome them, singing, dancing, and weeping with happiness. The 5 long years of exile were over. The family was reunited and they were home. They had been through the fire and emerged stronger, their love for each other and their commitment to their people forged into unbreakable steel. They could now begin the next chapter of their lives, a chapter that would see them lead their country to freedom. The return from exile marked a new beginning, not just for Ruth and Seretse, but for the entire Bechuanaland Protectorate. Seretse, having renounced his claim to the chieftainship, threw himself into local politics. He started as a humble member of the tribal council, the very body he was once destined to lead. He and Ruth settled into a relatively quiet life on their cattle farm near Seretse. For the first time, Ruth was able to truly immerse herself in the life of the nation she had chosen as her own. She learned Setswana, the local language, and embraced the customs of the Bangwato people. She was a familiar sight in the local markets, driving her own truck, her children in tow. She was not a distant, aloof figure. She was an active and engaged member of the community. She worked tirelessly with local women on development projects. Focusing on education and healthcare, she helped to establish women's clubs and community centers, using her organizational skills to empower the women around her. Her genuine warmth and down-to-earth nature quickly won over any remaining skeptics. The people of Bechuanaland didn't just accept her, they grew to love and respect her. They called her Mohumagadi, which means Mother of the People or Queen, a title she had earned not through birthright, but through her actions and her character. Seretse, meanwhile, was laying the groundwork for a political revolution. He saw that the future lay not in tribalism, but in a unified, non-racial democratic nation. In 1961, he founded the Bechuanaland Democratic Party, BDP. The party's message was simple and powerful: unity, self-reliance, and democracy. Its symbol was a carjack, representing the idea of lifting the nation up. Ruth was his most trusted advisor and his most ardent supporter. She campaigned tirelessly by his side, traveling across the vast, dusty landscapes of the country, meeting people in remote villages, and sharing their vision for the future. Their partnership was a powerful symbol of the kind of country they wanted to build, one where black and white could work together as equals. In a region dominated by the racist ideologies of South Africa and Rhodesia, this was a radical and dangerous idea, but it resonated deeply with the people of Bechuanaland, who had seen in Ruth and Seretse a living embodiment of that ideal. In 1965, Britain finally agreed to hold the country's first democratic elections. The BDP, led by Seretse Khama, won a landslide victory, taking 28 of the 31 seats in the new Legislative Assembly. Seretse became the first Prime Minister of Bechuanaland. It was a stunning political comeback. The man who had been exiled by the British as unfit to rule was now the democratically elected leader of his people. On September 30th, 1966, Bechuanaland gained its independence and became the Republic of Botswana. At the stroke of midnight, the British Union Jack was lowered for the last time, and the new blue, black, and white flag of Botswana was raised. Sir Seretse Khama, now knighted by the very same queen whose government had exiled him, became the nation's first president, and by his side stood Ruth, the First Lady of Botswana. The former clerk from London, the woman who had been rejected and vilified, was now the mother of a new African nation. Their journey had been long and arduous. They had faced down the prejudice of an empire and the suspicions of their own people, but they had never wavered in their love for each other or their belief in a better future. The controversy surrounding their marriage had paradoxically become the catalyst for Botswana's unique path. It had forced a national conversation about race, tradition, and identity, and had ultimately set the country on a course of non-racialism and democracy that would make it a beacon of hope and stability in a troubled region. Their personal struggle had become their nation's triumph. The legacy of Sir Seretse Khama and Lady Ruth Khama is etched into the very soul of modern Botswana. Their story is more than just a historical footnote. It is the nation's founding myth, a constant reminder of the principles upon which the country was built. Under Seretse's leadership, Botswana defied all expectations. At independence, it was one of the poorest countries in the world, with only a few miles of paved roads and a handful of university graduates. It was completely surrounded by hostile white minority-ruled states. Most observers predicted it would quickly become a failed state or a puppet of South Africa. They were wrong. Seretse and his government managed the country with a prudence and foresight that was remarkable. Shortly after independence, massive diamond deposits were discovered. Instead of this resource curse leading to corruption and conflict, as it has in so many other nations, Seretse ensured that the diamond wealth was used for the benefit of all citizens. The government negotiated a partnership with the diamond company De Beers that gave the state a significant share of the profits. This money was then invested in building schools, hospitals, roads, and providing free education and health care for all. But their most profound legacy was the creation of a truly non-racial and democratic society. In a region torn apart by racial hatred, Botswana became an oasis of tolerance and stability. Seretse famously said, "A nation without a past is a lost nation, and a people without a past is a people without a soul." He believed in respecting tradition, but not being shackled by it. He built a nation where citizenship was not defined by race or tribe, but by a shared commitment to the ideals of democracy, equality, and the rule of law. Ruth, as First Lady, played a crucial role in shaping the social fabric of the new nation. She never sought the political spotlight, but her influence was immense. She was the patron of countless charities and organizations, particularly those focused on the welfare of women and children. She was a symbol of service and a powerful role model. Her quiet, steadfast presence by Seretse's side was a constant visual rebuttal to the racist propaganda of their neighbors. She showed the world that love and humanity could transcend the artificial barriers of race. One of the most striking testaments to her character comes from a simple, often overlooked fact. For her entire life in Botswana, she refused to have bodyguards. She moved freely among the people, trusting in their affection and respect. It was a small detail, but it spoke volumes about her relationship with the nation she had made her home. Tragically, Seretse's life was cut short by pancreatic cancer in 1980. He died in Ruth's arms. His death was a moment of profound national grief. The entire country mourned the loss of its founding father. Ruth, though heartbroken, remained in Botswana, the country she now considered her only home. She continued her charitable work and remained a beloved and respected figure, the nation's grandmother. She passed away in 2002 and was buried next to her husband in the Royal Cemetery on a hill overlooking Seretse. Thousands of Botswana from all walks of life came to pay their last respects. Today, Botswana stands as a testament to their vision. It is one of Africa's most stable and prosperous democracies, a country that has consistently ranked high in international measures of governance and low in corruption. Their personal story has become a source of national pride, a powerful narrative of love, resilience, and the triumph of principle over prejudice. It reminds us that sometimes the most profound political changes begin not in the halls of power, but in the human heart. In the end, the story of Ruth and Seretse Khama is a story about the transformative power of love. Not just the romantic love between two people, but a broader, more expansive love. Love for one's people, love for justice, and love for a future where our common humanity is the only thing that matters. They were two ordinary people who found themselves in extraordinary circumstances. They could have chosen the easy path. Ruth could have stayed in England. Seretse could have married a more suitable wife. But they chose each other, and in doing so, they chose a path of struggle, sacrifice, and ultimately triumph. Their lives teach us that history is not just made by armies and politicians, but by the quiet, courageous decisions of individuals. They stood against the immense power of the British Empire and the suffocating prejudice of their time, armed with nothing more than their conviction and their love for each other. They showed that a commitment to one's principles, even when it seems hopeless, can change the world. The image of the English clerk and the African chief standing together against the world is a powerful symbol of hope. It tells us that bridges can be built across even the widest of divides, that love can indeed conquer all. Their story is not just a piece of history, it is a timeless lesson for all of us. It reminds us of the importance of judging people, not by the color of their skin, but by the strength of their character. It is a story that leaves us with a sense of profound admiration for the human spirit's capacity for love, courage, and resilience. Ruth and Seretse Khama were rejected by two continents, but they built a nation that became a home for all, and that is a legacy worth remembering.